Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint by Sing Shong. Chapter 121. Things That Can Be Changed. Part 1. Soon afterwards, the plains became stained with blood from the battle. No, it couldn't be called a battle. Internal organs flowed from the torn flesh of the small people. Every time the Japanese moved, the small people were trampled on. Aaak! Save me! Save me! It might be a small scream, but the weight of life was the same. They were small in size, but they had a normal life like the humans on Earth until the scenarios arrived. People ate, worked, and lived an ordinary life with their family. The familiar scenes from Earth overlapped with the corpses of the fallen small people. The Japanese incarnations shouted, "Ha ha ha! This is what it feels like." Perhaps Sun Quan should have been born in this age. It was an age where evidence that human nature was fundamentally evil was everywhere. The victims who were slaughtered by someone immediately turned into the perpetrators when provided power and rewards. Maybe they were even worse, because they had been hit once. Shin Yu-sung asked me, how can they do this? Perhaps it wasn't a question that she was really curious about. She already knew the answer to the question. I placed a hand on Shin Yu-sung's shoulder, without a word. Shin Yu-sung's shoulders shook like a person carrying a heavy burden. This is too much. Gain coins, gain new items, gain skills, and become stronger. People didn't know a way to live a bit longer in this world. That's why all survivors understood other survivors. Some survivors lived in shame, because they understood it. Disaster, a small person crawled towards our feet. Please, mercy. The power that went beyond common sense evoked fear and awe. For the inhabitants of Peaceland, humans were both gods and disasters. I bent over and extended a finger to the small person. His hand reached out towards this finger. There were rough breathing sounds as the small person came into contact with the tip of my finger. A strange joy filled the face of the small person at the moment of his final breath. It was as if he touched a god and received salvation. Perform the duties of a disaster. Now we had to kill these small people. I felt Shin Yu-sung emitting a boiling magic power next to me. I was afraid she would immediately rush to the Japanese people, but her killing intent was directed in a very rational direction. That guy made this scenario? It was the intermediate Dakibi. Unlike low-grade Dakibis, a graceful-looking Dakibi was effortlessly floating in the air, with crossed arms. It wasn't Paul who was taken to the bureau. He would be melting in the heat of hell right now. I remembered the text of Ways of Survival that I read beforehand. The intermediate Dakibi of the abandoned world scenario. His name is Ganul. The intermediate Dakibi Ganul said. As expected, the third quota players of Japan Dome are hot from the beginning. I hope you will make a lot of coins on Peaceland. It was the third quota. As expected, the scenario of Japan Dome was very hard. Haha, this is the best. This is the reason why the first and second quota people ran so quickly. Do you see the coins coming in right now? Isn't this a completely free scenario? Many constellations are excited. Some constellations want to see 10 small people being killed at the same time. Anger soon filled the face of Shin Yu-sung. It is because of these bastards. However, there was no place for her rage to go. The constellations were on top of the star stream. They weren't someone that Shin Yu-sung, who was only an incarnation, could face. That's why all we could do was find a scapegoat to pour out this anger towards. Ha ha ha, 10 at once. I will kill you first. I couldn't find any traces of reason in the eyes of the Japanese people joyfully wielding their swords. In their eyes, the small people probably looked like living coins. A juicy, this. Then a heavily armed small person walked out of the troops. He seemed to be the commander of this army. Glory to Calcivia. The commander of the army raised his sword and bravely rushed towards the disaster. The Japanese people seemed annoyed and swung their swords. Surprisingly, the small person escaped with swift movements. The surprised Japanese incarnation cried out, "W what?" The commander ran along the blade and succeeded in stabbing the back of the Japanese person's hand for the first time. It was a great combat power. The startled Japanese person waved his arms to shake off the small person. "Damn it. It hurts." The small person screamed as he was thrown onto the plains. The other Japanese people laughed like it was interesting. "There is a pretty brave person?" It was almost as if there hadn't been a successful blow, but there was a faint smile on the face of the small person who succeeded. There was a small scratch on the back of the Japanese person's hand, as if he had been stabbed by a needle. "Oh look. A disaster is bleeding." "Wah." It was one drop of blood. This drop of blood was a miracle to the small people. They could also kill a disaster. The gods were bleeding. It was only one drop, but it taught the small people. "We can do it. Attack. Just a bit more." The small people stopped fleeing and started running towards the disaster. "What is this all of a sudden? Go away. You worms." The small people swung swords smaller than toothpicks at the Japanese people. The useless arrows filled the air, and the cavalry maintained their formation without giving up, driving their lances towards the feet of the Japanese. There was still no damage, but the small people didn't give up. Xing Yusung watched the scene with her hands clasped tightly together. Then an indirect message was heard. A small planet's constellation is supporting the incarnation, Galenium. The constellation of a small planet. A constellation that was born on a small planet and grew on the beliefs of the small humans. A small planet's constellation has sponsored 10 coins to the incarnation, Galenium. Perhaps the incarnation called Galenium was the name of the small person who hurt the Japanese for the first time. Calcivia. All of the small people were excited, as if they could win if they attacked a bit more. At least, until the voice of the intermediate Dakibi was heard. "This situation is fun. Isn't it more exciting with resistance?" The Dakibi Ganol laughed as if to ridicule the resistance of the small people. It was a strange laugh. The bigger the despair, the darker the story. A black aura emerged from the bodies of the Japanese incarnations. The small people realized that something was wrong and stopped attacking. Now part of the disaster penalty is lifted. If you choose the path of evil, you can get additional buffs. The Japanese people looked down at their bodies and frowned. "Why do we need this? This game is already too easy. This will make the fun vanish. This is also easy. Think of it as a game to relieve stress." "Well, if you say so." The Japanese people chuckled and didn't hesitate. A strong magic power filled the Japanese people. Based on their stigma, they seemed to have a samurai sponsor. I didn't think they were famous. Some of the probability constraints on the disaster have been lifted. The synchronization with the disasters and sponsors will increase for a period of time. The lacking probability will be paid by the Star Streams Bureau. The ground was crushed and blood splattered from over 100 of the small people. It was a considerable destructive power. However, from the viewpoint of the small people, no, it would be surprising for the small children. In front of these disasters, several small people urinated while others fell unconscious. The small people stared blankly at the disaster, as if they had forgotten how to scream. Yua. The small people holding weapons knelt down. Even the commander who first hurt the Japanese people dropped his sword onto the ground. The eyes filled with courage were now completely broken. "We can't win. Our planet, now." This form of despair was familiar, making it painful to see. "The small planet's constellation has discovered you." Then a message was heard. "The small planet's constellation is looking at you with pathetic eyes. The small planet's constellation is expecting your compassion for a small planet. The small planet's constellation is looking hopefully at you. A small planet's constellation has sponsored you 10 coins." I frowned and looked up at the sky. "You have returned the sponsored 10 coins." Then the messages continued. "The small planet's constellation is embarrassed. The small planet's constellation has turned red with shame. It was a misunderstanding. The constellation thought I wasn't moving because 10 coins was too small. However, this idea was wrong. I spoke in a small voice towards the air. If you are really thinking about your planet, then don't do that. The small planet's constellation is embarrassed. Don't make your planet a story to sell for money. The small planet's constellation is silent. In the distance, the second Japanese attack was coming. It would surely wipe out the remaining small people. Shin Yu-sung declared, "Ajusi, I can't stand it anymore." The black aura around the Japanese incarnation's body was gradually becoming thinner. The probability buff was slowly being released. It was time to act. I spoke to Shin Yu-sung. There is a way to clear the scenario even if we don't become disasters. Ajusi? However, it will be really hard and terrible. Shin Yu-sung's eyes shook. You might be tempted to give up. Do you still want to do it? In fact, I was going to do this from the beginning. I just waited to increase the odds. No matter how pitiful the inhabitants of the planet, they were a different species after all. The most important thing for me right now was Shin Yu-sung's life. The probability constraints of the disasters have been restored. The black auras around their two samurais returned to its original state. Shin Yu-sung nodded. I can do it. I gave her a signal and ran forward. The star stream has detected anomalies from you. Warning. Be careful to avoid being hostile to other disasters. Maybe Shin Yu-sung would soon regret her decision. It would soon become clear what would happen to those who gave up convenience in an easy scenario. However, sometimes a person had to give up convenience to defend their beliefs. Blade of Faith is activated. Light exploded and a roar filled the plains. Chapter 122. Things that can be changed. Part 2. In short, the small people were human beings, but they weren't from Earth like I was. There was a clear contradiction in opposing the human race of another planet. Therefore, my current actions were due to the enormous ethics of humanity or justice. If I opposed the small people here, then I would miss out on the achievement I needed for the ending. This was the only reason I needed to stab Blade of Faith into the ground. The star stream has detected anomalies from you. Warning. Be careful to avoid being hostile to other disasters. If the hostile acts are repeatedly accumulated. Dust flew up and the Japanese screamed as they lost their vision inside the dust. Yuaak. What is this all of a sudden? Cough cough. It was a blow filled with considerable power, so the dust didn't sink easily. A small planet's constellation is touching his chest. I was troubled for a moment. If I killed them with my own hands, I would be able to get a new scenario right away. However, the penalty for it would be tremendous. I wanted to delay that moment as much as possible. That's why, at least. Ajusi, I'll do it this time. Shin Yu-sung pulled out a dagger that she had received from Usanga and stepped forward. I will deal with both of them. Can you do it? It won't be a problem. She was like Lee Gil-young. I didn't know why kids were so proud these days. Usanga would have stopped her, but I wasn't Usanga. I encouraged Shin Yu-sung. You shouldn't fight for a long time. Did you hear the penalty message just now? You should handle them as quickly as possible. My options in this scenario would be wider if Shin Yu-sung could deal with both these people. I had a lot to do in Peaceland. Among them, one of the most important goals was to catch the snake that Persephone mentioned. If I didn't get any penalties in advance, then I might be able to catch the snake earlier than expected. What bastard did this? Shin Yu-sung ran through the dust towards where the voice was heard. At almost the same time, I hid myself using Recluse's cloak. It would be an invalid item if they had high-level detection skills, but these guys didn't seem to have it. Sharp magic power emerged from Shin Yu-sung's dagger and moved in a half-moon arc. Yua. The Japanese people withdrew from the dust. The earlier move that created the dust had been intentional. I missed a golden opportunity, but there was a way to defeat them without me fighting. The Japanese people were surprised when the child appeared in the dust. What, this kid? The Japanese incarnation spoke to Shin Yu-sung. Kid, why are you stopping us? Don't you know what will happen if you do this? Unfortunately, it just sounded like a foreign language to Shin Yu-sung, who didn't have the interpreter skill. What are you saying? Now the Japanese people noticed the situation. Are you perhaps from South Korea? Ah, that's right. This time, the first Korean group entered. Damn it, the first group will be huge. Their complexions suddenly darkened. Kid, get lost. We don't have to fight each other. Don't fight. Don't fight. Okay? TL, they're speaking in bad English. We just have to kill them. Small people. Kill. Okay? TL, they're speaking in bad English. The Japanese said they had no intention of fighting in poor English, but Shin Yu-sung just shook her head. Her sharp dagger pointed at them and the Japanese people shrugged. Get lost or die. It is one of these two options. The Japanese started to slowly step back from Shin Yu-sung. Damn, this doesn't make sense. There isn't a bounty scenario. My sponsor wants me to kill this little kid? Aren't there two of us? Did you forget the fighting power of our first group? They were clever people. Everywhere in the world, those selected for the sixth scenario were the elites of their country. In Japan, the gap between the first group and those who came afterwards was probably considerable. Similar emotions emerged on the faces of the two Japanese. Should we run away? On the other hand, strange delight spread among the small people as they watched the confrontation between Shin Yu-sung and the Japanese. Why? They were shocked. A small disaster was suddenly fighting against a bigger disaster. Perhaps it is the small savior? Yes, the prophecy was right. A small planet's constellation is supporting the incarnation, Shin Yu-sung. A small planet's constellation has sponsored 10 coins to the incarnation, Shin Yu-sung. The incarnation, Shin Yu-sung, has received the possibility of a new scenario. I watched the scene while grasping the hilt of my sword. It was a bit underhanded, but it was a way to chase them if they ran away. As I thought, things wouldn't go so smoothly. The intermediate Dakibi watched from the air and giggled. Japanese incarnations, you might think you are disadvantaged, but are you really? In any case, this damned Dakibi. The Japanese people realized something and muttered, that's right. That reminds me, the first group. Didn't Asuka become affected by a mutation? The Korean people would be affected by the same thing. I'm telling you now. There is no need to tell me. In any case, she is just a Korean chibi. The eyes of the Japanese people changed after they made a decision. Both of them stared at Shin Yu-sung with killing intent. Yes, let's fight once. I don't like children. They let out unpleasant laughs. Shin Yu-sung didn't understand the words, but she immediately grasped the situation. Their blades moved as the two men slowly surrounded Shin Yu-sung. The killing intent around all three people rose, while the two men moved simultaneously. Shin Yu-sung had raised her agility to the maximum and avoided their blades without much difficulty. However, the difference was narrow. These men might not be the best elites of Japan, but they were part of the top incarnations. I saw their swordsmanship and was reminded of a description in Ways of Survival. They used only one sword instead of two, and it wasn't the large rock style. This meant I didn't need to worry about them being Miyamoto Musashi and Sasaki Kojiro, some of Japan's top swordsmen. It wasn't bad for Shin Yu-sung's debut. It will be hard for you to keep running, kid. Their aura became even sharper as their sponsors lent them power. The blade that wanted to cut the legs aimed at the legs, while the blade that wanted to cut the arms aimed at the neck. It was natural to step back at the attack. However, Shin Yu-sung's movements were caught by the swordsman. No matter how high Shin Yu-sung's overall stats, the swordsman's combat skills were overwhelmingly superior. Shin Yu-sung's collar was cut and a small line formed on her arms. I firmly held the hilt and prepared to move at any time. It was a pity that I couldn't act properly as her sponsor. Die. The Japanese cried out in an exaggerated tone and aimed at other parts of Shin Yusung's body. This time Shin Yusung didn't try to escape. Shin Yusung was weak in strength and lost her grip on her dagger. The Japanese took this chance to dig through the gap. However, Shin Yusung didn't panic. The character Shin Yusung has used Advanced Diverse Communication LV3. Rather, she turned back and settled on the back of the monster waiting for her. It was a steel wolf. What? It was the right judgment. The basis of fighting was to minimize the opponent's advantage and maximize your advantages. Awoo! There were the cries of the wolves as dozens of steel wolves simultaneously emerged from the forest. She had tamed so many wolves in such a short time. She truly was the future Beast Lord. Shit! The surprised men swung their swords at the wolves, but the wolves were already biting onto their arms and legs. Fuck! These bastards. They might be weakened 7th grade monsters, but the two people would have to consume a lot of magic power to deal with them. It was truly a rewarding sight. However, Shin Yusung was still unaware of something. This was why I warned her not to waste time. The star stream has detected abnormal behavior from the incarnation, Shin Yusung. Hostile acts against a disaster have been detected. The incarnation, Shin Yusung, has been given a first scenario penalty. The penalty had finally begun. Shin Yusung groaned as she suddenly felt less magic power. Some wolves suddenly left Shin Yusung's control and returned to the forest. The character Shin Yusung's body size has decreased. The character Shin Yusung's total stats has decreased. The Japanese also noticed it. That's it. I knew this would happen. Just a little longer. It ended up like this. Shin Yusung glanced at me with anxious eyes. I approached behind Shin Yusung using Recluse's cloak and touched her shoulder. Shin Yusung's trembling subsided. Thank you, Ajusi. Shin Yusung understood something and bit her lips. The incarnation, Shin Yusung, has been given a second scenario penalty. Shin Yusung's body size was getting smaller. That's right, this was the result of a disaster abandoning their authority. Still, she had enough power remaining to take away the lives of the Japanese people. Shin Yusung showed the highest agility level and approached their backs using the beast. Did she learn from watching you, Senga? Shin Yusung stabbed her dagger in a poisonous manner. Her dagger moved and a man's carotid artery was cut. Cakewook, are ridiculous. The man paled as blood gushed from him and he fell to the ground. The character, Shin Yusung, has defeated the disaster without a name. Major contributor, Shin Yusung. Shin Yusung wiped the blood that splattered onto her cheek and moved to the next target. The man was terrified and stepped back. The steel wolves rushed in and bit his arms and legs. Quackhack. Shin Yusung approached to cut off the man's breathing. It all happened in an instant. The incarnation, Shin Yusung, has been completely deprived of the rights of a disaster. The Dakibi of the Star Stream sees Shin Yusung's behavior as taking action against the scenario. The incarnation, Shin Yusung, has been given a third scenario penalty. The small person transformation will begin. In this scenario, a person who gave up their qualification to be a predatory species would become the prey. Shin Yusung's body became smaller at an incomparable rate. There was a small groan as Shin Yusung's clothes became too big and her dagger fell to the ground. Shin Yusung's height shrank from my waist to my knees and finally to my shins. Then Shin Yusung's body was buried in her clothes. Her stats diminished and her control became weaker, causing the steel wolves to return to the forest. A small Shin Yusung emerged from her clothes and lumped towards the man. Yusung, you can stop. Shin Yusung gasped for breath. There was a mixture of poisonous anger and grief in her eyes. There had been many fights with monsters, but this was probably the first time she committed a serious killing. He is already knocked out. Shin Yusung stared at the fallen Japanese man. He was lying on the floor while foaming at the mouth. I tore away a bit of my clothes and covered Shin Yusung's body. Shin Yusung was as small as my fist and observed her body for a while. She probably realized what had happened to her. We have to fight them in this state? Yes. How many are left? A lot. Shin Yusung looked up at me with a complicated gaze. A juicy, did you know? We will become a small person if we are hostile to the disasters. I nodded and approached the fallen Japanese man. I checked, and he was in his early 20s at best. He was still breathing. Are you going to use this person? Shin Yusung asked me. There is a person I have to kill before I change. New messages rose as soon as I said this. Be careful to avoid being hostile to other disasters. Those who are hostile to disasters will lose the right to be a disaster. There was still a Dakibi having fun in the sky. Yes. Laugh while you can. The star stream thinks that your disaster activities isn't enough. If you don't kill the rule of Peace Land in the next hour, you will be deemed as unwilling to act as a disaster and will be deprived of the status of a disaster. I looked down at the Japanese man and slowly took off my cloak. There was 1 hour remaining. In this 1 hour, I had to catch their king. Chapter 123. Things that can be changed. Part 3. Suzuki walked through the forest and thought, I was really lucky. Suzuki trembled as he recalled what happened. A girl who manipulated monsters and wielded the dagger with great skill. Suzuki couldn't forget how Murakami died with one blow. South Korea is scary. A child is already at that level. She was just a kid, so Suzuki couldn't guess how skilled the man near him was. The man was wearing a pure white coat and held a white sword. There wasn't anything special about him apart from the color of his coat, but he was a lifesaver to Suzuki. Thank you very much. I would have died if you hadn't been here. It was nothing. I was honestly impressed. I didn't expect to get help from a Korean person. It was natural to help. The man in the white coat was modest. Above all, Suzuki liked that the man was good at Japanese. It was obviously a skill, but having the Japanese interpreter skill was a sign that he liked Japanese culture. Suzuki asked, I don't know your name yet. Can I get your name? I am Suzuki Tatsuya. My name is Dokja. Kim Dokja. Kimu Dojega? Kim Dokja. Ho. Kim Dojega. Wasn't it a good name? Suzuki liked this Korean name. By the way, did you see the child? She killed my colleague. Unfortunately, I missed her. Sigh. I see. Suzuki didn't know if this was true or not. It couldn't be helped even if it wasn't true. In any case, this person was South Korean. It wasn't strange for him to hide the child or pretend he didn't see the child. Still, it was disappointing. Suzuki would have been able to get revenge very easily if he caught the child. As part of the third group from Japan, he already knew about the small person transformation hidden piece of the sixth scenario. He stated, you saved me, so you must have witnessed the small person transformation. If you're talking about how she became smaller, I naturally saw it. Then the story will be quick. We are from different countries, but we don't have to fight each other in this scenario. Our enemies are the small people, not humans. I know. That's why I saved Suzuki. Fortunately, the Korean man in front of him seemed to agree. Kim Dojega said, by the way, the Japanese side knows many things. Yes. We progressed quickly through our scenario, and there were similar cases among the previous players. It was similar? There were a few cases where a human turned into a small person. What happened to them? Most of them are dead. Only one person is still alive. Kim Dojega heard this and seemed to think of something. It was hard to know what the Korean was thinking. The slightly nervous Suzuki opened his mouth. This is just a reminder, but I don't hate South Korea. Why are you saying this all of a sudden? Don't Koreans think that Japan hates Korea? It was said by the Prime Minister, who was part of Japan's first group. Of course, it was just a nickname and he wasn't the real prime minister. South Koreans have a strong nationalist sentiment. They will dislike anyone who badmouths their country. Suzuki disliked the prime minister but never received any damages from listening to his words. Kim-san. I also like Kim Ah-hyun and Park Sung-ji. Autumn Sonata is also very interesting. My mother liked it. Always mention Kim Ah-hyun, Park Sung-ji, and Autumn Sonata when meeting a Korean. This was the prime minister's advice. I love Japanese manga. It is like this. The prime minister was apparently right. Suzuki asked excitedly, what manga do you like? It is hard for me to pick one. I don't know if I can keep reading now. Certainly, it is a bit unfortunate. I waited for the manga every week, but I don't even know if the mangaka is alive. It was bitter thinking of such things. Suzuki also liked these things. Manga was one of them. It is because everything has changed. A juicy. Shin Yu-sung's voice broke the immersion. I was in the process of using Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint Stage 2, so I couldn't answer Shin Yu-sung immediately. The exclusive skill, Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint Stage 2 has ended. Your understanding of the character Suzuki Tatsuya has increased dramatically. Immersing myself in the character made it easier to understand them. It was smooth because he had a shallow personality. My focus wasn't high because I was conscious, but it wasn't hard to read what Suzuki was thinking. A juicy? Sorry, I was busy practicing a skill. The small Shin Yu-sung was currently in my pocket. Shin Yu-sung spoke to me through a direct connection because of our sponsor contract. It was a bit surprising. I could tell what she was asking without thinking. I watched Suzuki Tatsuya, who was still telling his story. Suzuki appeared as a passing character in Ways of Survival. The world was described from his point of view for a smooth storytelling, but he could only get a few pages in Ways of Survival. Still, most ordinary lives could be summed up in a few chapters. I don't understand. Such an ordinary person, how can he do such cruel things? Shin Yu-sung couldn't understand because of the foreign language, but she caught the gist of the conversation. I couldn't help noticing her agitation. I mean, Kim-san. The talking Suzuki seemed like an ordinary university student. He was an ordinary youth who took great joy in talking to others and could be found anywhere in the world. I told her. I saw it a lot in South Korea. An ordinary person killing the person next to him to survive. At the time, it couldn't be helped because of the scenario. It is the same now. That person is doing it because of the scenario. It is just an excuse. He won't die even if he fails. Don't think about it this way. I asked her. If the dead small people were in our position right now, would the situation be different? I don't think Suzuki is evil. However, I'm not saying he is good either. The original evil is ordinary. We are ordinary people, but we seem like the most terrible disaster. Then he isn't a bad person? No, every human is a disaster for each other. I deliberately exaggerated things. If I didn't say this, Shin Yu-sung might not be able to escape from the guilt of killing a person. She asked, then will I become a disaster in the future? Don't worry. I'll stop it from happening. There was something buzzing in my ears, and insects were flying around me. Suzuki was annoyed as he continued the story. The insects here are still the same size. Aren't they disasters to the small people? That's right. There was no way. In this small world, insects couldn't be the same size as Earth. Yu-sung. Do you understand what they are saying? The species that could be tamed by Shin Yu-sung and Lee Gil-young were different, but it was possible to understand the language of other species through diverse communication. There was a reason why I placed Shin Yu-sung and Lee Gil-young in different groups in the first place. Hyung, second team, met. Good. Then can you pass along my message? I could feel Shin Yu-sung nodding. The insects flying around soon disappeared into the forest. Suzuki saw the distant insects and asked, Kim-san. Are you listening to me? I'm listening. Weren't you talking about creatures from another world? I thought a person who could talk about manga even in this situation was very rare. I struggled to accept it. I heard that this genre is popular in Japan. Haha, yes. Creatures from another world are my favorite. It is similar to our situation now. However, it is hard to draw. The story contents in Japan just before the fall of this world would have been similar to South Korea. Japan and South Korea's novel sections were full of stories about going back to the past. However, the Japanese side was probably a bit worse. The young Japanese people thought there was no hope when returning to the past. I wondered, isn't it fun when it is hard? Huh? This is what I like. You're having fun. Suzuki cut through the low bushes and suddenly thought of something. That reminds me, we have a mangaka on our side. A person called Asaka Ren. Asaka Ren? That person said something similar to Kim-san. A story isn't fun if it is too easy. That person right now. Oh, we have arrived. A small empty clearing appeared in the heart of the forest. The anticipation that could be felt everywhere tickled my skin. Perhaps this was the main base of the Japanese early arrivals. By the way, something was strange. You have entered somebody's colony. Your physical condition meets the requirements of a colonist. The colony effect reduces your overall stats. Suzuki's expression towards me had changed. He asked, "You said it is better to solve hard problems?" Dozens of armed Japanese people popped out of the bushes. Good. Then I will make it that way. I was a bit surprised by the unexpected betrayal. Was Suzuki originally this type of person? The exclusive skill, character list is activated. Plus. Character list summary, name, Suzuki Tatsuya. Private attribute, double-faced person, rare. Sponsor, Silent Sword. Plus. I see. This was his attribute. I was still lacking. In any case, Ways of Survival was a novel that could be never-ending. How many people weren't summed up in a few pages? By the way, the colony effect was activated, so it seemed the king of this area wasn't the snake. He knew I was Korean and deliberately drove me to this side. You brought the Josenjing. TL, a Japanese slur for Korean people. A samurai who emerged from the bushes said, and Suzuki bowed his head. The samurai asked, "You are from the third group. Are you part of the Prime Minister's group?" No. Then is this a tribute? That's right. What is your name? Suzuki Tatsuya. I see. Well done, Suzuki. From now on, you are in our group. Prime Minister. Things had become worse. As far as I knew, there was only one Japanese incarnation who was called Prime Minister. He was one of the enemies I had to be most wary of, apart from the snake I had to catch. It was because his ability exerted a nearly absolute influence on Koreans. The samurai stepped forward and spoke. He wasn't the Prime Minister. The slave of the great Japanese Empire has walked into the colony. I grasped the handle of unbroken faith and declared, "If you attack me now, then the small person transformation will begin. We don't attack you. You will attack us. Why should I? Otherwise, your colleagues will die." What? Dr. SSI. I'm sorry. I looked towards the voice and saw 4 small people standing side by side. To be precise, they were transformed into small people. Lee Hyunsung, Lee Gilyung, Lee Jaihai. Finally, the smiling number 406 grandmother. The samurai placed his sword against Lee Hyunsung's neck. Do you understand this situation now? I couldn't help laughing. Normally this would be a cancerous development, but I was rather pleased. As expected, my companions had hurt the Japanese people and became small people. Shin Yu-sung asked. Ajusi, what should we do? What else? Hunt the small people in 10 minutes. Otherwise the star stream will determine that you have no intention to carry out the activities of a disaster. It was the wrong timing to catch the snake. Then, well, the new target wasn't much different. Come on, Josenjing. I looked up at the sky and sighed. Then the stars shone at me like they had been waiting. All the constellations of the Korean peninsula are looking at you. It couldn't be helped. If they expressed such aversion. Every constellation of the Korean peninsula are angry at the atrocities of Japan. Some of the constellations who have lived in a certain time are waiting for you to call. It was proper for me to punish the other party.